Hey everybody, Josh Peck here. Hope you're doing well. We haven't talked about Dead Sea Scroll stuff in a while, and I want to talk about some of that, but also the Book of Revelation, the Antichrist, the desecration of the temple, specifically when that might fall on what feast day, what that represents, what that half an hour of silence is in Revelation 8, what the why the angel has this golden censer of incense and all that. Believe it or not, all of this stuff connects in really exciting ways. And it wasn't until I really dug into the Dead Sea Scrolls that I was able to piece all this together. So I'm excited to talk about this. We haven't talked about, again, like Dead Sea Scroll stuff or even prophetic timeline of the tribulation in a while. So that's what we're going to get into. By the way, I want to make mention that if you do want the notes to this, and it's not just the notes, it's pretty much the entire script of everything that I say. If you want that with all the information and everything, couple different ways you can do that. The best way, become a member at dailyrenegade.com, and then you can download a PDF of this entire episode and have all the notes, all the citations, everything. And then you have that file forever. You can keep it. That is yours. And not only that, but you get this full video plus every full video that we do, stuff that we don't put on YouTube because of censorship issues. So we have that available. Also at dailyrenegade.com, if you're a member, there's a community tab where you and other members can fellowship and talk with each other, talk about theories, anything you want. There's no censorship there. I created Daily Renegade because I was getting censorship on YouTube and Facebook constantly, and I wanted a place that we could talk about whatever we want and not have to deal with that. So we have that now at dailyrenegade.com. So you can do that. Also, there is joshpeck.substack.com. And if you go there, you'll still get the notes, but it's not a downloadable PDF. Some people don't want to download an extra file on their computer. It's basically just like it's an online blog. So you can sign up for a membership there, and then you get the entire blog just right there on the Substack. Not only that, but you also get the audio only podcast version of everything we do, and that is also the full episodes. Some people don't want to deal with a video, they just like having the audio. So if you want that, that is joshpeck.substack.com. Links to everything is in the description below. And best thing to do is just get both of them. Then you have the best of both worlds. I also want to make mention that everything we're going to talk about today in this episode of the Sharpening Report comes from my 2-volume set, Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which you can pick up at prophecywatchers.com if you would like that. And again, links are in the description below. All right, so all that out of the way, let's get into it. Probably a lot of you are already, if you follow this channel, you're probably familiar with the Essene calendar and stuff. I don't want to get too much into introducing what that is because most of you already know. And if you don't know, that's okay. Like, I've got a lot of videos on this channel about it, especially at dailyrenegade.com. I have even more there. But basically, what it is the Essenes were contemporary with Pharisees and Sadducees, but they were the ones that believed that they held on to the true Jewish religion. They believed that the Pharisees and Sadducees were children of darkness. They called them that. Their interpretations of Scripture was way off. And the Essenes believed that they held on to the real interpretation. They also had their own, they had a calendar, which they said was the same calendar that God gave to Adam. Well, what's amazing is when you actually look at this calendar and compare it to the Bible, it is the calendar that the Bible uses from Genesis to Revelation. And I'm going to show that today. More with the Revelation stuff. I'm going to show how the Dead Sea Scroll Essene calendar works with that. Which, by the way, also, just while we're on the topic of the calendar, I do talk all about it in my books, but we also the guy that really put this together, who really made this accessible to everybody, is Dr. Ken Johnson. He also wrote the foreword of my books, Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But we made available a print version of the calendar that has our Gregorian calendar on one part, and then on the other part, it has the Essene calendar, so you can actually compare, and it's a great resource. It's a great study tool. It's a very unique thing that you can't get anywhere else, and I have the link to that in the description below as well. And we do a new one every year, so and that's really interesting because coming up in coming up next year, we will be in a new Jubilee, the final Jubilee of the church age, according to the Essene. So that's really exciting. Again, I have other videos and stuff on that. I'm not going to get too much into that in this video, but I got lots of stuff about that. So again, links in the description. But so using that calendar, that was probably one of the most fascinating things in researching for those books. That 2-volume set was that the Bible uses this calendar, and it is accurate from Genesis to Revelation. So throughout this study, I'm going to be referring to the Essene calendar, and again, so that's just a basic, real quick intro on what the Essene calendar is. I've got plenty of other videos explaining it more in depth, especially at Daily Renegade, where you can find everything. Okay. So we'll just start in the introduction, which is a prophetic interpretation in light of the Essene calendar. So there was an interesting command from an angel to the prophet Daniel that might clue us in to our own time today. So after giving some amazing prophecies, the angel tells Daniel, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. That's Daniel 12:4. Many of you are probably familiar with that. Now, while this verse is typically understood to indicate that the prophecies in Daniel will not be understood until the last of the last days, the book of Daniel was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this means quite literally that copies of the book were sealed, encased in jars, and hidden away in caves for about 2,000 years. Then they were discovered among other scrolls that gave us the entire calendar system by which we can understand prophecies found in Daniel. Now, I don't believe this is exactly fully what the angel meant when he said, shut up the words and seal the book, but it's an interesting thought. Could this be a sign that these are the times of the end? Well, it's impossible to fully understand the prophetic timing systems used in Daniel without having access to the original biblical calendar that Daniel himself likely used. But now that we know more about the Essene calendar, Moedim cycles, and specific festival days, we can take a fresh look at some of these prophetic passages in the Bible to see if we can bring in a new insight, and we can. Now, we typically, excuse me, I got a new microphone system here that I'm still trying to get used to, but we typically view prophecy in light of the festivals by recognizing that Jesus came to fulfill the spring festivals in his first advent, and then when he returns, he'll fulfill the fall festivals. And we've also been given a tribulation time frame of 7 years from the book of Daniel, with the last half of the tribulation, sometimes called the Great Tribulation, being described as 3.5 years or 42 months or 1,260 days in the book of Revelation. And this is basically how the broad layout of the 70th week of Daniel, chapter 9, has been interpreted. We're going to talk about something that might challenge the idea of the Jesus coming back in the fall a little bit, but that's okay. I think this tracks. And after you see all the evidence and really take time to digest this entire video, I think you might agree. So let's begin our examination of these prophetic texts with chapter 12 of Daniel. So this is going to be Daniel 12:7 and then 11 through 12. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held his right hand and his left hand unto heaven. Hey everyone. You know, concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, like silver, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 today, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, it would be around $28,000 today. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. Now, you can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door. And what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even your 401k into physical silver rather than having all your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is, of course, subject to hyperinflation. So go to dailyrenegade.com right now and click on the Cornerstone Asset Metals banner and sign up to get your free silver report. One of the financial experts will speak with you and find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. You can also click on the link in the description below that goes directly to cornerstoneassetmetals.com. Make sure you tell them that Josh Peck at Daily Renegade sent you. It is time to stop trusting the evil beast financial system of the world and protect your assets today. And swear by him that liveth forever that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Now we're going to go to 11 and 12. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. Okay, so in this passage, there are three intervals of time that are mentioned. So among most Bible prophecy researchers today, these intervals are typically understood as time, times, and a half, 3.5 literal years. Now, I say most scholars say that. I didn't say that that's, or most prophecy researchers say that. That might not actually be true, and we'll get into why in a minute. But then 1,290 days, so that's 1290 literal days, and then the 1,305 and 30 days, which is 1,335 literal days. Now, interestingly, when we see what the original Hebrew says in Daniel 12:7, we might decide to interpret time, times, and a half a bit differently. So the word used for time is actually moed, which refers to the Moedim cycle, or a cycle of Jewish festivals, not necessarily a month or year time period. So it is true that one Moedim cycle would equal 1 year, because we would start at one festival and then we would end on that same festival the following year. In fact, 2 Moedim cycles would equal 2 literal years for the same reason. But half a Moedim cycle doesn't necessarily work out to half a year all the time, which is 6 months. Our full yearly Moedim cycle list from the Temple Scroll. And again, if you want more information on this, I got plenty of videos, and also the best resource is Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scroll at prophecywatchers.com. But so the Bible lists 7. But the Temple Scroll found in the Dead Sea Scrolls has a few extra. It lists 12. And I'm going to go into why that would actually make a lot of sense. So from the Temple Scroll, most of these are probably going to sound familiar, but there's going to be a couple new ones. So the first one we have is Nisan 1, which is head of the year or spring day of remembrance. The second one is Nisan 14, which is Passover. And Nisan, if you're not familiar with that, this is just what they called their months. You know, we have January, February, March. Also, if you want a free resource for that calendar that's online, go to dsscalendar.org. Dead Sea Scroll, dsscalendar.org, and you can look this up there for free online. Dr. Ken Johnson also created that. So then we have 3, Nisan 15 through 21, which is unleavened bread. 4, Nisan 26, which is first fruits of barley. ER 14, which is second Passover. Sivan 15, which is Pentecost. Av 3, which is first fruits of new wine. Elul 22, which is first fruits of new oil. Elul 23 through 28, which is the wood offering. Tishrei 1, which is trumpets or fall day of remembrance. Tishrei 10 is Day of Atonement, and Tishrei 15 through 22 is Tabernacles. Now, and that's all 12 of them, where a half of a Moedim cycle ends would actually depend on where it starts. So it seems that this would be impossible with the typical list of 7 that we're accustomed to, because that's an odd number. How can you have half of a Moedim cycle, half of a list of 7? We would have to either have 3/7 or 4/7. But this works beautifully on a list of 12 because 12 is an even number. Half would be 6. So we can demonstrate how half of a Moedim cycle doesn't necessarily equal 6 months. So if we started at the beginning of the year, and if this list reflects the correct number of festival days, one half of a Moedim cycle, from the 1st to the 6th, would only bring us to Sivan 15, which is Pentecost, and that's only a third. That's only in the third month of the year. So that's clear. And that would be half of a Moedim cycle. And it's only in the third month of the year. It's only 3 months. So even if we counted Pentecost as inclusive within our half a Moedim cycle, we would come to Av 3, first fruits of new wine, which occurs in the third day of the 5th month. So not exactly 6 months. So that time times and half a time, that half a time doesn't mean 6 months. It means half a Moedim cycle. Um, so what we have described in Daniel 12:7, again, it's not 3.5 calendar years, but rather 3.5 Moedim cycles. So we see a parallel usage of these words in Revelation, also in chapter 12. Revelation 12:14 says, "And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, so she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nursed for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent." So in the Greek, time and times is translated from kairos, which, just like moed, can mean a season relating back to Moedim cycles. So it would appear that both passages are talking about Moedim cycles. And in fact, these are both most likely describing the same Moedim cycles that concludes Daniel's 70th week. So now we can note some interesting things here from Daniel 12:1 about the 1290 days. In fact, this verse proves the final half of Daniel's 70th week isn't exactly 3.5 calendar years, but it's actually a little bit longer. There is no known calendar from the time of Daniel's writing that can accommodate 1290 days into 3.5 years. Um, so if we work out the math, so we divide 1290 by 3.5, that equals roughly 368.58. Then we discover that to make this passage describe 3.5 calendar years, each calendar year would have to consist of a little more than 368 days, which doesn't work. Even more, the number of months doesn't add up correctly. If we divide 1290, that's the days in total, by 30 days in a month, we get 43. However, we get mention of 42 months, not 43, in the prophetic timeline of the Bible from Revelation 11:2 and 13:5. So we must not be dealing with a 3.5 year calendar cycle, but rather a Moedim cycle that would accommodate all of these numbers. So we actually have a lot of clues to figure out which festivals these are. So since we know we have 1290, 1290 literal days, and 3.5 Moedim cycles to work with, then we need to find a festival day that we can start at a 1290 count and end on another festival day. We know that there are 3 full Moedim cycles, and those add up to 3 full calendar years, since each cycle starts and ends on the same day. If we multiply 364, and that's 364 days in a year according to the Essene calendar, by 3 to compensate for the 3 full Moedim cycles, we arrive at 1,092 days. And you might be thinking, if you're not familiar with the calendar, well, 30 days in a month doesn't work. It does because they had what's called a leap week. So every 5 or 6 years, they would add a week to bring the solstice back to where it should be. And it does line up perfectly. So we can do this math, and we know it's accurate. So again, we know that, again, if we multiply 364 days, because we know the time and times, those are full years because it goes from one Jewish festival to the next one the next year. So those by default are 3 full calendar years. It's that 6 months. Or not 6 months. It's that half a time that we're not sure exactly how many days it is because it's not going to be 6 months. So this is how we find out. So 3 times 364 is 1092. So now all we have to do is subtract 1092 from our total days of 1290 to find out how long our half a Moedim cycle must be, which comes out to 198 days. So now we know the half of a Moedim, the times, and half a time, the half a time must be 198 days. Now, I know it can be difficult to keep all these numbers in mind, and that's why it's really good if you have the notes, because if you have the notes, you can have it all listed in front of you. Um, but um, so it might. So let's list them again. So we have full cycle 1. That's 364 days. That happens to be 1 calendar year. Full cycle 2. Um, 364 days, which happens to be 1 calendar year. Then full cycle 3, 364 days happens to be 1 calendar year. So that accounts for the time and times. Now the half cycle, the half a time. We now know through the math that we just did that that is 198 days, which happens to be 6 months and 16 days. So a grand total, 1290 days, it happens to be 3 years, 6 months, and 16 days. So just a little bit more than 3.5 calendar years. So now all we need to do is find 2 festival days that are 198 days apart to see when the 1290 days might begin and end. Additionally, to fulfill the half of a Moedim cycle, we need to find 2 festivals that have 4 full festivals in between them. So 1 half of a Moedim cycle totals 6 festivals. So we need to find a festival, be able to count 4 festivals after, then the next one would be our 6th, thereby completing a half of a full Moedim cycle. So if a full Moedim cycle is 12 festivals, then half a Moedim cycle should be 6 festivals. You know, no one gets into full-time ministry to make money. At least no one should. Given that, Daily Renegade accepts donations from those who care to help keep us going. Now, because Daily Renegade does not want to be told by the government what we can and can't say, we're not 501c3, so your donations are not tax deductible, but that's not why you're giving anyway, to get something back for yourself. Speaking of which, we here are never going to promise that if you donate, God will reward you with even more financial success. We're not about making promises for God here. But what I can promise is your donations are very much appreciated and help the continuation of everything we do here at Daily Renegade to reach the world with the truth of the Bible. Also, as many of you know, my son Nathan has had some very serious medical issues that we are treating with good, all-natural and holistic remedies. But of course, those are very expensive and are not covered by insurance, so your donations help go towards his health care as well. If you can't afford to donate, you can always donate your time in prayer, which is far more valuable anyway. Let's be serious. So pray for our wisdom, pray for God's guidance for us, and that we never lose focus on what's really important, which is using Daily Renegade as a light of truth that the world so desperately needs right now, especially in these times. As always, thank you so much for your generosity, and I pray God blesses you greatly. Now, on our Essene calendar for the 1290-day count to work, we need to find 2 festivals that are 6 months, which is 182 days, and 16 days apart for a total of 198 days apart. If we started our 190-day count, which again in total would be 1290 after we add the 3 years back in, on one of those festivals of the first month, let's say Passover, well, we would end the count in the 8th month. However, there are no festival days in the 8th month, so it can't be that. If we tried to start our count on the spring day of remembrance, we arrive at the 3rd day of Tabernacles, which would be a possibility, except they're not a half a Moedim, they're not 6 festivals apart. Now, from Pentecost, we would arrive at the 7th day of Hanukkah, or Tekufa Tevet. But that is unlikely since Hanukkah did not exist during the time Daniel was being written, and Tekufa Tevet is not listed in our Moedim list. So that one's out. So next, working from our Moedim list, we have a couple more possibilities. From the Feast of Trumpets, 198 days later, lands us on the 3rd day of unleavened bread. And that's a possibility. In fact, unleavened bread is the sixth festival day after trumpets, so that could qualify as half a Moedim cycle as well. If we start on the final day of the wood offering, we arrive at Passover 198 days later, and Passover is the sixth festival after the wood offering. So that could be a possibility too, but while both are possible, neither really seems to fit perfectly in the way that we might expect. Because for either to work, we would have to start or end the count partway through the festival. So some festivals are more than just one day long. Some go on for multiple days. So we would have to start or end partway through a festival. We don't know if partway through a multi-day festival would qualify since it's not a full festival. I suppose if we were using a list of 7 festivals instead of 12, being that 7 is an odd number, a half a Moedim cycle would have to be halfway through one of the multi-day festivals. But that seems unlikely because a festival is considered as the entire time. You can't count it a festival if it's only partway completed. It's all or none. For the festival to be completed, the whole thing has to be completed. There isn't really a such thing as a half of a festival. Anyone who stopped participating in a festival halfway through, that would be viewed as not completing the festival. So it would not count as a festival. So in short, with festivals, it's all or none. However, using the Temple Scrolls list of 12, we need to deal with full festivals since 12 is an even number. So given that, wouldn't it be more exact for the count to land on the first day of a festival? Well, there is good news, though it might not be what we expect if we think Jesus is coming back in the fall. And when I say coming back, I mean his bodily return at the end of the tribulation. I'm not talking about the rapture here. The rapture could happen anytime. That could happen in spring, summer, fall, winter, who knows? So there is only one set of 2 festivals that are 198 days apart, and the latter is the 6th from the former, thereby completing a half a Moedim cycle. It's the Day of Atonement and the following first fruits of barley. That's the only one that matches this description. So if the Abomination of Desolation happens in the fall, and I'll get into why, but I believe the Abomination of Desolation happens right in the middle of the tribulation. If that happens in the fall, the beginning of the tribulation, so 3.5 years back, and then the return of Christ, 3.5 years forward, would both occur in the spring. Now, that does go against tradition a bit, but when we think of this, considering what these festivals represent, the Day of Atonement and First Fruits of Barley seem perfect candidates for what prophetically occurs on these days. So remember, this is the final part of the tribulation period. It's not exactly in the middle, but it's roughly in the middle, and it begins with the setting up of the Abomination of Desolation. So the Day of Atonement would actually be a perfect day for this to occur because this is the day that the temple is supposed to be cleansed. It would make sense if a third temple is built by that time that this would be the day that the Antichrist decides to desecrate it. It also fits because this is the day that the Jewish people of Israel will finally discover that they have been betrayed again, just like they were by the actions of Antiochus for Epiphanes thousands of years prior. This would be the time for Israel to atone and finally begin to accept the true Messiah, Jesus Christ. We also know from Daniel 12:11 that 1290 days is the length of time that the Abomination of Desolation is set up. So how will it be taken down? Well, presumably by Jesus Christ himself. Now, first fruits of barley was the day when Jesus showed up to his disciples in his resurrected body. So wouldn't it make sense for Jesus to return to Jerusalem at the end of the tribulation, where his Jewish brothers are, on that very same day? Now we can confirm this with a second piece of evidence. Revelation 11:2 says, "But do not measure the outer courtyard of the temple, leave it out, because it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will trample on the holy city for 42 months. Revelation 13:5, the beast was given a mouth speaking proud words and blasphemies, and he was permitted to exercise ruling authority for 42 months. So we have 42 there, not 43, which you would expect if we were talking about calendar years, like we just talked about just a few minutes before. If the Antichrist begins his true reign of terror midway through the tribulation on the Day of Atonement, roughly midday, then we can count 42 months to see when it will end. And amazingly, and fitting in beautifully with what we've already discovered, 42 months after Tishrei, the month of the Day of Atonement, is Nisan, the first month of the year. Nisan is the first month of first fruits of barley. So, if this interpretation is correct, Jesus will be back to set things right on first fruits of barley, which is 42 months after the Antichrist begins his rule by setting up the Abomination of Desolation on the Day of Atonement in the month of Tishrei. Now, this also helps us understand a familiar prophecy given by Jesus. Matthew 24:15 says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand." Now, there's a couple options for what the holy place mentioned here is referring to. Some say it's the Holy of Holies in the temple, offering the example of Antiochus Epiphanes as evidence. Now, as Dr. John Walvoord explains, and this is from Christ's Olivet Discourse in the Time of the End, Signs of the End of the Age, from Bibliotheca Sacra, 128. Anyway, John Walvoord wrote, First Maccabees 154 specifically records that the abomination of desolation was set up, fulfilling Daniel 11:31. In the Holy of Holies, Antiochus set up a statue of a Greek god. In keeping with the prophecy, and daily sacrifices were stopped, the sanctuary was polluted, desolated, and made an abomination. So we're going to see a repeat of that. Because Jesus says, when you see, by Jesus' time that had already happened. So we're going to see a similar fulfillment that the Antichrist is going to do. So Jesus begins by saying, when ye therefore see. So if something is happening in the Holy of Holies, when can that be seen? Well, according to Leviticus 16, only the high priest was allowed to go into the sacred chamber, and this was only permitted once a year on the Day of Atonement. So the only time anyone could see what was happening in the holy place under normal circumstances would be on the Day of Atonement. Since this interpretation specifically refers to what Daniel prophesied in lines with the words of Jesus, it seems to be the most likely way to understand the holy place. And you know, something else that people bring up is like maybe they have cameras in there and they can broadcast what's happening in there. There is another option, though. Others have pointed out that the book of Exodus mentions the holy place as separate from the most holy or holy of holies. So Exodus 26:33 through 34 says, "And thou shalt hang up on the veil under the tachys, that thou mayest bring in thither within the veil the ark of the testimony, and the veil shall divide unto you between the holy place and the most holy. And thou shalt put the mercy seat upon the ark of the testimony in the most holy place." So there's a division here. This veil divides the holy place from the most holy. So if the holy place is not the Holy of Holies, that would be the most holy place, but is instead a place outside of it, that could help explain how the abomination of desolation is more of a public spectacle. Either way, it doesn't negate our suspicion that all of this occurs on the Day of Atonement. But there's a lot more evidence to consider. And here's where we're going to get into the Feast of Trumpets. We're going to talk about that, what that all means. We're going to talk about what that half an hour of silence is all about. And I think all of this just proves what we're saying even further. This desecration happens on the Day of Atonement, and it's the Antichrist that's desecrating the temple. So, like I said, a lot more evidence to discover here. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the first half of this episode of the Sharpening Report. You know, if you are a Bible-believing Christian who opposes the kingdom of darkness trying to run the world right now, then you are a renegade to the satanic system. We here at Daily Renegade wear that badge proudly. So, if you're a renegade as well and you want to see the rest of this video, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now and get a membership today. Not only will you get the rest of this video, but you'll get our full catalog of Sharpening Report episodes and Daily Renegade update videos on topics such as Bible prophecy, science, technology, the Nephilim, aliens, and so much more. All of our episodes at Daily Renegade are early access, so as a member, you'll get the videos before anyone else does. Daily Renegade also offers videos not available anywhere else due to social media censorship. We also have a community page only for members where we can all fellowship together without fear of censorship. It's basically the best of Facebook and YouTube rolled into one without any of the garbage. Memberships are only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can do it, I suggest getting the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run, and essentially you get 2 months for free that way. So come join our family of renegades at dailyrenegade.com right now. The link is in the description below, and we'll see you there.